How do you feel about the tax the wealthier people movement? You know damn well what Redditors are going to think of this. Don't care for it nearly as much as I care for the stop the extreme tax evasion by big companies movement. Obligatory edit. Wow. This thing blew up. Also thanks for my first silver. Out of all the things it had to be a comment about taxes. The level of stupidity about taxation is astounding. People need to first learn how tax brackets work. There's way too much misinformation surrounding taxes on the wealthy. It really is more of going back to what it was, not necessarily a movement. Do you mean progressive taxes are okay, or the push for a wealth tax? Regarding progressive taxes, even Adam Smith was okay with it. From the wealth of nations, our necessaries of life occasion the great expense of the poor. They find it difficult to get food, and the greater part of their little revenue is spent in getting it. The luxuries and vanities of life occasion the principal expense of the rich, and a magnificent house embellishes and sets off to the best advantage all the other luxuries and vanities which they possess. A tax upon house rents, therefore, would in general fall heaviest upon the rich, and in this sort of inequality there would not, perhaps, be anything very unreasonable. It is not very unreasonable that the rich should contribute to the public expense, not only in proportion to their revenue, but something more than in that proportion. But for wealth tax, the devil will be in the details. How does it interact with trusts? Will it destroy different endowments? Is it progressive? To be honest, I think we would be better off normalizing capital gains with income tax and drastically increasing the top bracket of inheritance tax. If they'd actually pay the taxes they should, we wouldn't have to make them pay more. Edit. Not every country is America. Don't attack me if you think your country taxes the 1% fairly. For me it's not so much tax them more as tax them proportionally in terms of burden. You can tax wealthy a lot more without affecting their lifestyle or opportunities compared to the razor thin margin some people live with. Money is power, and with great power should come great responsibility. This is where I get downvoted, but here goes. To start with, I absolutely believe in a progressive tax system. That said, most of the country fails to differentiate between the 1% and the 0.001%. Most of the 1% are paying at minimum 1/3 of their income in taxes, and some are approaching 50% in states with high state income tax. The reality is that most of the tax breaks people talk about are not available until you make it to the ultra high net worth bracket. Reddit would have you believe most 1%s are dodging their tax bill, when in fact they are paying a significantly higher percentage than most. I'm all for people paying their fair share. I think millionaires should pay their share, and I think billionaires should pay more than millionaires. That said, there is a limit to how many times you can just add an extra percent to the 1%. I think it is quite the stretch for someone paying 10% of their income in tax to say the guy paying close to 50% of his income in tax should pay more in taxes. There are also a very high percentage of people paying extremely low to no taxes in this country. Most US citizens don't realize just how low their taxes are compared to all the European countries who they constantly compare themselves to. If you want healthcare and higher education, everyone needs to contribute something. Sure, tax high earners more, but if earners taxes need to go up, close loopholes to the ultra wealthy, support a progressive tax. In the end everyone needs to pay a fair amount. Look, the biggest issue with this is what is actually done with the money. Anyone who has worked in government or the military will tell you that the government lights money on fire in ways that those on the outside would struggle to comprehend. Increasing taxes on its own does not mean better public services. A far more meaningful movement would be pushing for more efficiency in government spending. That would increase public services without having to raise taxes, or provide the same public services with the ability to lower taxes. Raising taxes for the sake of raising taxes doesn't make anyone better off. It just appeases a desire for fraud and fraud. Seriously, please like and subscribe, and comment something nice for your favorite Reddit slave. In the UK I'm definitely within the top 43% in earnings, but I wouldn't have been so successful in my career without free tuition fees, free school lunches, And the disability benefit my mum got to feed and clothe me. I'm proud to pay a higher tax rate so that others could have the same support I needed and my family needed to survive. So long as the government actually spends it where it should be instead of payouts to failing corporations and corrupt contracts. Fuck everyone to thinks. Keeping an extra £10 is more important than bursaries for nurses and free lunches for school kids. Fuck you all. Edit. Thanks for the silver. Kinda sucks if you live in a state like New York where the taxes are already bullshit. I think the government is just terrible at resource allocation. And it won't really make a difference because the issue less a lack of government money and more a lack of government ability to make good decisions. Depends on how it's done. If we are talking about the US, I personally believe we are spending too much money overseas and not spending enough money to help our own country. So in a way I guess you could say I'd like it more if people would recognize where in my opinion I think we are wasting money as a country rather than just try to tax any given class more. It's just how I feel about this. I very well could be wrong. It should not be considered a tax the rich more vermont. It should be at a time to end tax cuts for the rich. Remember that the Bush tax cuts were designed to only last for 10 years because the people who wrote the bill were honest enough to admit that they were unsustainable. And of course when that time came, Republicans pitched a fit and Dems did not even try because they had the same donors. I'm for it. The middle class gets screwed every time. I would prefer the don't spend recklessly and require me to pay income tax, property tax, sales tax, gas tax, a fee to have tabs on my vehicle, tax on hotels/motels, etc. while simultaneously pushing deeper international debt movement. I'm all for taxing someone else as long as it isn't me, says nearly everyone. I'm fine with it, but defining wealthy is important. I'm also skeptical of giving the government even more money when they can't even spend what they have now properly. We've taxed the wealthiest Americans as much as 90% at times in this country's history, and however you feel about that, everything was fine. The country was prosperous. People still started businesses and bought things and invested and hired employees. All the economy things we love talking about. I don't think this will solve all our problems, but it won't be a catastrophe either. We've tried this thing where wealthy people get wealthier and wealthier and pay less and less in taxes because we were told that wealth would trickle down. And it's not working. So let's try something else. Maybe I'm thinking about wrong, but I make a pretty good income and I get taxed more than the bracket below me, which is fine. That's how it works. There is a higher tax bracket than me and they get taxed a little bit more and so on. But what kind of stumps me is that the highest bracket starts at like 600k, which a lot. Don't get me wrong, but why do people who make multiples of 600k not get taxed more? Just like I get taxed more than the people below me. Why do the brackets stop? Perhaps I'm wrong here. I actually hope I'm wrong, because if I'm not, then this doesn't make much sense. The whole tax the rich plan won't work. There are 550 billionaires in the US and their combined wealth is $2.5 trillion. If you were to confiscate 100% of that money, you would have enough money to run the federal government for less than 8 months. The problem is not how much the rich or any other group pays in taxes. It's how much the government is spending. The view we need to tax the wealthy more are made by sad, envious people who don't understand economics or the true source of our problem. If the US taxed the wealthy every dollar they had until no wealthy existed anymore, we still wouldn't have enough money to run the government for more than a couple months without borrowing more money. So clearly the reason some want the wealthy taxed isn't to pay for services like infrastructure, healthcare, etc. The math doesn't add up here. So the only reason to want the wealthy taxed, if it isn't to pay for services, is out of some misguided attempt at making things fair. As long as the increases only affect people wealthier than me, I'm on board. Taxes on the wealthy have done nothing but drop at a steady rate since 1980, while the taxes, adjusted for inflation, on the middle class have risen. The resulting increase in the wealthy's personal wealth has come at the expense of the middle class's average wealth, and money velocity has all but died. As a result, trickle-down economics, which was the rationalization for the tax cuts for the wealthy, had been entirely repudiated as a viable economic theory. What the fuck even is this question? How about less government and less government spending? Just a thought. Not really got an issue with it, but people do need to realize a few unfortunate and inconvenient facts before they go about it. Firstly, if you tax rich people too much, they will move all their assets to places where they don't have to pay as much tax. Is it annoying? Yes. Is it morally questionable for them to do it if the taxation is within reason? Yes. But they are going to do it. There's nothing you can do to stop them leaving without creating some extremely authoritarian laws that will end up being used to fuck poor people over too. And there will always be countries that tax less than others. So tax them more. But don't go fucking crazy and start saying we should take away all money earned over $1 billion, because it won't work. Secondly, net worth is not an accurate measure of how much money someone has. Money is a unit of measurement. It measures how much a thing is worth in today's society, but in the same way I can say that the distance between the Earth and the Moon is 3.5 million football fields apart without actually having 3.5 million football fields or the ability to put them in space end to end. I can also say that Jeff Bezos has a net worth of $112 billion without him actually having $112 billion. It's a way of visualizing how much something is worth. Most of Jeff Bezos' money, as an example, is in the form of his assets, like Amazon. But he doesn't actually have that money. He can't get it out at a cash machine. When he looks at his bank balance, it doesn't say $112 billion. And you can't seize $100 billion from Jeff Bezos and use it to fund free university tuition. You may be thinking, well, we can just seize Amazon and sell it off to people, except you can't. First of all, Amazon would lose a huge amount of value if the government seized it, and it would be worth nowhere near as much as it is now. And secondly, since Noon actually has $100 billion in real physical money, they can't buy Amazon off you for money. They'd have to pay for it with their own assets, which puts us in the same position as before, unable to use that money to fund infrastructure projects, etc. That being said, the wealthy should still be taxed more. It's just about realizing what the limits of that taxation are.